of it right now, so it's kind of getting better. But I guess I was sleeping and they didn't want to wake me up. But I came here to join you this evening, so we should do it. Anyway, so that was the mix-up. I apologize. If we can just sit together for 5 minutes. Yeah. Okay. So this evening's topic, dragons. Dragons have quite sure, I have a bunch of things in my head and my head is very groggy, so I'm not sure it will come out in sequence, but dragons exist in all cultures, all places around the world. One of the most ubiquitous kinds of mythology or figures in mythology. And there are some questions why you have dragons everywhere. And so what they did was analyze it's like a genetic analysis of stories. You analyze certain story elements and then put it together in like a genealogical tree. And because kind of all nations have this dragon story, they assume that it comes back to one original story, which is traced to South Africa. This I don't think is true. Can I give you the conspiracy theory? I'm just going to tell you what I think, and then, because we're a little low on time. So, there's a man called Velikovsky. Anyone know Velikovsky? It was some years ago. He was actually Einstein's best friend, and he was a little odd. I wouldn't read any of his stuff. Well, I have read his stuff, but and what he said was that Venus had been spat out of Jupiter within human history, and had travelled around, come past the Earth, and settled into an orbit, and that the Earth had moved orbit as well. Now, if that sounds a little far-fetched, but there's a lot of good evidence for it. And so what he said was that Venus would have been seen in the night sky by human beings with a plasma tail. This was over 100 years ago that he said this, and science kind of rebuffed him and mocked him. And then 60, 70 years later, the Russians landed a probe on Venus and found out that Venus is hot enough to melt lead. I mean, it's really, really, really hot. Then in years later than that, when we started putting up sensors for solar flares and things, we found out that Venus actually does have a plasma tail, like a comet. So there is getting more and more evidence that this was actually true, and that Venus would have been seen in the sky with a fiery tail coming off it, and that all cultures around the world obviously would see this dragon in the sky. I notice in Thailand you have a lot of like nagas and dragons, particularly going along staircases. Do you ever notice that in the dragon's mouth is a pearl? Right? So where does the pearl come from? The pearl comes from, that was Venus that was seen with this big fiery tail coming off it. So we still have the memory of that thing that we could see. Anyway, that's my... don't go to mainstream science for this. It's actually called the electric universe theory, and there's a whole bunch of people that follow this. So this is why dragons have the characteristics that they do. One is that they're very fiery. They don't actually breathe fire. That kind of came later, or kind of an idea, but they are themselves fiery and flamey. That's why they snake across the sky, because unlike a comet, which is on a single trajectory, the comet tail or the plasma tail of Venus would be snaking around. And why possibly, and of this I'm really not sure, but possibly when Venus was being seen, it would bring rain. So most of the dragon stories, although dragons have wings and fly in the sky, almost every dragon story has dragons living in the water, not in the sky. So how does a water-dwelling creature breathe fire? Why does a water-dwelling creature have wings? Well, that was because that's what you saw. And it would seem like it would come up out of the sea and swim across the sky and come down. And that's where you get this strange dichotomy of a sea creature or water creature that's in the air. So, as the dragon stories go to China, dragons tend to be quite positive. As they came over to the Indo-European area, they tended to be more negative. So St. George, I put the flag of St. George up on the announcement today. St. George was the patron saint of England, is the patron saint of England. And he was, I think, somewhere in North Africa, and there was a dragon that was demanding to be fed, and after they fed it all the sheep and cattle, it demanded humans. So they were sacrificing humans to the dragon that lived in the swamp. So St. George comes along at night with a long lance, and he comes along and he slays the dragon. In some versions he slays the dragon, another version he injures the dragon and then drags it to the town. And then says to the town, if you convert to Christianity, I will kill the dragon for you. I guess that's how they did it in those days. So then they made a temple for St. George. They converted to Christianity, they made a temple, and the temple was put on a pure spring water, a spring of pure water. So, other than what may have been seen in the sky, mythologically, dragons have a particular significance. And that is, they will guard or bury treasure. Have you noticed this when you've seen dragons? They nearly always are controlling the treasure. And if you can get past the dragon or slay the dragon, you get the treasure. So mythologically speaking, what this means is the dragon lives inside. It lives in the squelchy swamp. Wherever you have the swamp in Jungian, Freudian psychology, it's always down in the belly. And if one wants to slay the dragon, or one wants to get the treasure of the dragon. Remember, the dragon has treasure because the pearl in the mouth was the original gemstone that it would have. So if you want to get to your treasure, you have to go down into the belly of the beast, face the beast, and then you will gain the benefit or the treasure for doing so. This idea of going into the belly of the beast is, if you know Joseph Campbell, the mythologist, the very overrated mythologist, he pointed out that almost all hero myths in the world, whenever the hero goes on the hero's journey, they will have a point where they have to go into the belly of the beast. So Jonah and the whale is one. But Joseph Campbell was good friends with George Lucas, and he sent a note to George Lucas when he was writing Star Wars, and he laid these story elements out. So in Star Wars, now you have all seen Star Wars, right? In Star Wars, going into the belly of the beast is where they go into the trash compactor. That was literally going right the way down, in as far in as it's possible to get into the bad guy. And there you face the demon of being squished, and then you manage to escape. So that's not, it's not a coincidence. That was deliberately, specifically put in as the journey into the belly of the beast. And just about every Star Wars film has had that, by the way, the ones that George Lucas wrote, the good ones. So what this means for us and our practice means that if you are to develop spiritually, if you are to mature spiritually, you have to face your demons. And to face your demons, you have to go into this swampy, dirty, squelchy place where this is all held. And this is why in fairy tales, frogs are always very auspicious, because the frog lives down in the well, but it can come up and communicate with you, which means you're unconscious communicating with your conscious mind. Dragons, and this is why bees are auspicious, because bees come from the air, they come from above, and bees have honey, and they also have a sting. So if you do the right thing, you get the honey. If you do the wrong thing, you get a sting of conscience, that where you know you're doing the wrong thing, you get sting of conscience. So dragons are, together with ducks, very auspicious creatures. You laugh. Dragons and ducks are the only creatures that can dwell in the water, on the land, and in the air. So whenever you find ducks in a fairy tale, the ducks are an auspicious animal. They can connect the unconscious with the conscious with the heavenly, or the unconscious motivations that motivate us into things, with the conscious mind, with the highest aspirations. So our way of developing is to, in Jungian, Freudian psychology, in fairy tales especially, in dragon myths, is to go in and face your demons. If you can face the demons, the reward is like St. George. You replace the swamp with a temple with a pure spring water in it, spring of pure water in it. Now, pure water always represents purified consciousness in tales and stories. In fact, water represents consciousness, so depending on the nature of the water depends on the state of your consciousness. So the Buddha would constantly describe the sense desire as being like a sea. Now, some of you might find the sea quite a pleasant prospect, but remember, in the old days, the sea was a seething evil thing with things in it that are going to bite you, kill you, eat you. The sea itself can eat you and destroy you. So the sea was never a pleasant thing in any kind of mythology. Then if your mind is getting more ordered, you go to like a river. The Buddha constantly described his consciousness like a river. And then if you purify it further, he described the mind as being like a still mountain pool in which you can see everything that exists in it. Every stone, every pebble, every animal. These were his analogies, the Buddha's analogies for consciousness. You may know The Journey to the West. You'll know The Journey to the West. Chinese classic with the monkey, the pig, sand spirit, the horse, and the monk. And the five travelers go. They travel from China to India to get the scriptures. Now it's about 2,000 pages long. I've never finished it. I think I tried to finish the Japanese TV version once. I'm not sure I ever finished that. It is very, very long. But in The Journey to the West, Monkey, in case you don't know, Monkey was born from a stone egg, and his name, Sun Wukong, means mind attained to emptiness in the Chinese. You speak Chinese, right? Don't tell me I'm wrong. Everything hinges on this. And so Monkey starts to gain his psychic powers, his special powers, and he is in Jungian psychology, he'd be the maverick. Or in George Lucas psychology, he would be the Han Solo. And Han Solo means maverick, right? The word solo means maverick, the one who goes off and does his own thing, who does the maverick who does something that everybody else won't do. So Monkey was the ultimate maverick character. And when he's learning all these psychic powers, he decides that he needs a weapon befitting of somebody of his great stature. He has an enormous ego. In fact, he called himself the great sage, equal of heaven, which rather upset heaven. And heaven eventually invited him up to stay in heaven because they wanted to keep him close and keep an eye on him. And that's when he disrupted heaven and smashed everything up. So while he's still gaining all his powers, Monkey, decides that he needs a weapon, and he dives into the ocean, and he goes down to meet the Dragon King who lives in the ocean. And the Dragon King in China, in Chinese, usually is fairly positive, fairly auspicious character. And so they bring him this incredible sword, and he's like, it's no good. And then they bring him a spear that's been, that's sharper, the sharpest thing in the entire universe. That's no good. And they bring him a whole bunch of different weapons, and then he's looking around, and there's a pillar holding up the palace, the underwater palace. And he says, what about that thing? And they said, you can't have that, it weighs 7.5 tons. And Monkey said, that sounds about right for me, and he grabs hold of it. And he swings it around a few times. This cudgel, it's called a cudgel, like a staff, a beating stick, is called, I can't remember in the Chinese, but something like wish fulfilling or willpower cudgel. And Monkey is able to shrink it down to the size of a pen, and he keeps it behind his ear. And then when he needs it, he whips it out, and it grows big, and he can beat people up with it. So Monkey got this from down in the ocean where the dragons live. This cudgel, mind attained to will, or wish-fulfilling cudgel, was something that a great god had used to measure the depths of the oceans. So it was called, one of the descriptions of it was ballast of the ocean. Ballast of the ocean. Ballast means counterweight. So we already said what the ocean means, the ocean of sense desires, the swamp of delusion. So the cudgel is the ballast, or the equal, or the counterbalancing factor of this ocean. And so that's what willpower is. If you use your willpower and your intention, you can overcome the entirety of your swamp. You can purify your entire consciousness. So that was what Monkey was doing. I have a lot of monkey stories. So in terms of our practice, what this means is then to go into the belly of the beast means that we are able to stop, turn around and look at the actual thing that's happening for us at this moment. Most of the time we're driven by subconscious drives. Again, very Freudian and Jungian. And I fully accept that there are counter-arguments to Jung and Freud, and they're not quite so popular as they used to be. To be able to hold something in mind clearly that is uncomfortable, and to try to find the original motivation behind it. If you can do that, that's going into the belly of the beast. And most people don't do that. You try to avoid unpleasant feeling and chase after pleasant feeling, which means you never really get to see that thing that you're hiding away from. There are many thousands of examples of this that I've come across in my time. I don't know which one to give you. Shall I tell you about this time a monk fell in love? It wasn't me. And it really wasn't me, honestly. I've never been in love. Is that bad? And he had a kind of difficulty with somebody that was living in the temple, a woman that was living in the temple. He kind of had a negative reaction around her. And then at one point he thought, okay, I need to figure this out. And he turned around and he looks at her. And then he realized that he was in love with her. And that every time that she'd come in, he'd have this fear come up, because he has his identity as a monk. And he was a really good monk. I say was. He did this robe. Not because of this, presumably. You'd have this fear come up every time she's in the room, because she's threatening his status as a monk, that this is what he wants to be, this is what he's dedicating himself to, and she's a threat to that. And that once he'd identified that lurch, that was his word, his stomach would lurch. Remember the squelchy bit? His stomach would lurch when she comes in, and then he'd realize that's the source of his negativity towards her. Yeah. He stayed as a monk for some years after that, and then disrobed later. I have another example. I don't want to talk too long because my energy is low. But maybe you have some examples you can think of and share. There's one example. I don't know if you know, I'm really good at telling you like facts, and I can tell you what's in the suttas. Whether it's true or not is up to you, but I know what facts are. But I'm very, very bad at giving advice. And I always panic when people take my advice. And because I have a lot of opinions, and then I give my opinions, and then I find out that I actually convinced somebody of something, and I absolutely crap myself. Because this happened once with a boat trailer, and I convinced this somehow, why they'd listen to me. I was a 20-year-old labourer as a welder. I wasn't a real welder, but I could weld. And I convinced this workshop who I was working for to build a boat trailer out of, it's probably a long story, you're not going to get it, out of rectangular pipe. Normally you build a boat trailer and you galvanize it, but it means the entire thing has to be exposed so it can be galvanized, covered in zinc. So I convinced them to build it out of pipe and paint it with this hammerite. Some of you must know hammerite, right? The paint hammerite. I knew I shouldn't have gone into this story. Hammerite is a glass paint that you paint on top of rust. So if your car's rusting or your fence is rusting, you can do it here too. Go to the shop, buy some hammerite, sand off the worst of the rust, and you paint the hammerite over the rust. So I convinced them to build this trailer out of square pipe, so we would hammerite it instead of galvanizing it. Anyway, it came back 6 months later. It was covered in rust from front to back. And this thing had cost like $50,000. It wasn't cheap. Fortunately, I'd stopped working for them by then. So it wasn't the only mistake I made, it turns out. What? Why did you tell them to use it? Well, I'm a big fan of hammerite. I love the stuff. I built a car in England. I built Mini, and I hammerited the whole thing, and it's just really good paint. It stops rust. So I didn't know it doesn't work in seawater. That was the mistake. Anyway, that's beside the point. I'm not very good at giving advice, and I panic when people take my advice. I'm like, no, you're not supposed to listen to me. But there was one time that I gave some advice that actually worked. So I'm prefacing that because I don't claim to be someone who gives good advice, because I'm really terrible. But this one occasion was a woman who came on retreat, and she was overwhelmed by the death of her father, who she'd been extremely close to, and he'd passed away, and she hadn't been able to reconcile herself to this. And so this was causing her a lot of trauma and a lot of trouble. Now, you probably know enough of psychology that if there's something that really is bothering you, that you're trying to defend yourself from, these are defense mechanisms. And they're very useful in the short term if you have heavy trauma to defend yourself against the trauma. But after a while, the defense mechanisms will start to cause you more trauma because you're avoiding that one thing. So I said to her to turn around and look at grief and say to grief, come on, grief, do your worst. Do the worst that you can to make me feel as bad as you possibly can. It's not good advice. It did work. And so she did it, and she turned around and she looked, and she just felt the grief. And I said, you keep feeling it until you're not afraid of it anymore. Anyway, by the end of the retreat, she was skipping around and laughing, and because she'd overcome this thing. She was avoiding feeling the feeling, and that was what was causing her the problems. A good short-term strategy, but as a long-term strategy, it's not going to work. So she went into the belly of the beast. She went in to find that thing that is causing her the trauma, and she ended up purified consciousness, like she can stop, let go of the grief, and start to feel happy again. So that's what we are doing with practice when we're doing our meditation practice. I'm very keen on the purification of consciousness in jhana states, which is the goal of practice, is what the Buddha taught. But sometimes you just have to turn around and feel that feeling that is going to overwhelm you. I've had a lot of that for the last few days because of feeling sick. And I keep thinking to myself, I hate feeling sick. And then what can I do? I can't avoid it. I can make worse of it. So one thing I do when I feel sick is I go walking. I do a lot of walking. It's just, I'd highly recommend it. Not that I'm giving advice. If you do it and it kills you, don't come back to me. But I go walking a lot because there's not much I can do. I can sit in my room and or I can walk and at least I'm moving, I'm bright. So then I would walk and and then I realized as I'm doing this, because I really like the aching, you know what it is, right? That tiredness. I'm not saying it's a bad flu, it's just like I'm a man and I want to complain about, you know, my father used to do that. He had one little thing wrong, he'd make sure everybody knew about it. So I was like, and then I because I'm trying to be mindful, I turned mindfulness to it and thought, where's this Like, I'm not really having to grunt to lift a foot. So I turn around and I look at it and I'm just feeling sorry for myself. I straighten myself up, I shake it off and I walk. Yeah, I'm still tired, I'm still achy and fluey, but I'm not going to make it worse for myself by getting entangled in it. So when you have these negative emotions, this is what happens. You get entangled in it by your thinking. You feel sorry for yourself, you're tangled up in it, so you want to dismiss it, you want to get rid of it, you're not willing to look at it. That is being tangled. And I didn't bring my tablet out, I had a sutta where the Buddha says, I think I can paraphrase it. So, in Buddhist terms, this is called the second arrow. And this is the story that the Buddha gave of a man who'd gone to war and he'd been shot with an arrow. And while he's lying on the ground, suffering from the arrow, if he were to pick up another arrow and start stabbing himself with it, would that person be wise? And they said, no, he wouldn't be wise. So this was the Buddha's own story for this, is don't get entangled in things. There will be unpleasant things that you have to look at. There are unpleasant feelings. If you're not willing to feel them, they will start to cause you trouble. If you're willing to feel those unpleasant feelings, after a while it starts to dawn on you that it can't overwhelm you. Feels overwhelming because you're trying to stop it, get rid of it. But when you stop and look at these unhappy, unpleasant feelings, a lot of these things, I find it comes from status. I read this book of Frans de Waal, is that his name? He writes a whole bunch of books about chimpanzees. Actually really interesting books, although I think he's probably milked a few too many books out of this topic. He's a chimpanzeeologist. And he looked at the way chimpanzees organize their social structure and how you have the alpha chimp or group of chimps and how they control the other chimps, male and female, and then how the other chimps have lower lifespans. It's unfortunate in the monkey world, the bullies live longer and healthier, partly because they take the better food, I suppose. Female chimps are quite sneaky because they actually sneak off with the non-alpha chimps, but where the alpha chimps can't see them. I guess as a way to spread the genes. So his general thesis is that we are a lot more like chimpanzees and bonobos than we like to think we are. We think that we're much further progressed, but actually we have a lot of the same basic things. And a big thing in chimp world is status and our seeking of status. And I see this a lot in society. I went with a friend of mine in Singapore. He's a former businessman. He has a secretary. I don't think they even have a business anymore. I think he just kept it because they're good friends. And I met him in Singapore recently, a year or two ago, and she wanted us to look at bags. And these bags are like $2,000-$3,000 a piece. And I was, I'm thinking that's a car there. Anyway, it was quite amusing, this kind of Indian guy and a Buddhist monk in these kind of shops looking at these handbags. And he was taking pictures of them and sending, no, that's not the one. She's like, well, there's another brown one. And she said, I don't want it because it's brown. I want this particular bag. And what do bags do? They confer status. They make you feel wealthy. They make you feel important. Same for jewelry. As do you know Barbara Corcoran? She's on Shark Tank in America. And she always said that she doesn't have, I guess she does have some good jewelry, but all her jewelry is plastic. She said it sparkles just the same and I'm not afraid of losing it. Perfectly reasonable. Of course, she has status. Now, it's one of the things if you get super wealthy, like the Elon Musks and the, what's this guy at Apple? That if you're so rich, then you can dress down. That also confers a kind of status. So much of what we do is actually driven by this need for status, this desire for status. So I was at Klong Tom a few weeks ago, called the Thieves Market in Bangkok, and I was crossing the road, and the traffic was supposed to be going, but actually the road is fairly empty, except for one motorbike. So I'm just going to cross anyway. So as I crossed, the motorbike had to just adjust a little bit. I didn't think it was a big deal. Anyway, he wagged his finger at me, like this. In fact, I think he wagged to the green light, or maybe the red light where I wasn't supposed to be crossing. It was just a couple of seconds, and that just like, yeah. So now I want to argue with him. Look, there's a big wide road. You expect me to wait here for 5 minutes just because of one motorcycle? It's easy enough for you to go past me. I had all these thoughts running through my head. And then I catch it. It's like, it's a loss of status. I've been demeaned. I should be able to be demeaned and not feel afraid of that. And when I catch it, it's like, yeah. And anyway, he's in the right. Anyway, I remembered this story because a couple of days ago, I was crossing a road and the lights had changed, but there was a motorbike coming in trying to get through after the light, and I wagged my finger at him. Now what am I doing? I'm trying to get my ego up, right? I'm trying to boost my ego, be in charge, be someone who can tell off other people. So this desire for status is another one of these underlying motivations, that if you catch it and you see it, so much of what you do is small things, very often small things, but is about status, or in Thai it's called losing face, right? So there are all these different kinds of emotions and feelings. The point is that if you're afraid of it, if you're not willing to feel it, it's going to control you. If you are willing to feel it, that's going down into the belly of the beast. You are the beast, by the way. That's Jonah going into the whale. And there you will find the resolution. And when you come out of it, you will have the pearl. You will have the purity of consciousness. So that's what is happening. It's what the Buddha called the second arrow. If you can see the first arrow, it's not going to be that bad. It can't overwhelm you. And if it is overwhelming, be prepared to be overwhelmed. If that emotion really, you can't shake it, then be willing to feel it. It won't last forever. Somehow, somewhere, even dying. I've been with people, a number of people when they're dying. Even that can't overwhelm you. And that most of the people in this situation that I've come across find a very special kind of peace before they pass away, which gives me encouragement. So, tangled within, tangled without. This is somebody asked the Buddha, tangled within, tangled without. This life and feelings are a tangle. How does one cut from the tangle? And the Buddha says, where perceptions and perceiving forms, he said, where sense impingement and perceiving forms proliferate, there is where you find the tangle. Where perceiving forms and proliferation ceases, there you have cut the tangle. I'm paraphrasing. I can post it up on Facebook. So that was his advice to how to stop yourself getting entangled. Anyone have any good examples of entering the belly of the beast? A difficult feeling that you had? I remember getting sacked as a manager. It took me years.
I think maybe one of the interesting ways to do it is rather than say you have the terrible feelings and you say I'm feeling depressed or I'm feeling this or that, just say the noun itself, depression or whatever, rather than trying to, you're going into the belly of the beast but you're not making it a personal experience.
Right. So tangling into something is proliferating around it. This word, pancha, proliferation. So because of this thing, you've motivated all these thoughts and these thinkings. If you can cut that, you're just feeling the thing itself, like openly with awareness. And remember years ago, Ajahn Sumedho had this story. He had a monk living with him called Kittisaro, who was always sick. And Ajahn Sumedho was always thinking, it's in your head a little bit, you're making too much of it. And he really wanted Kittisaro to get better. And so he'd send him off to doctors and he'd try to give him advice. And then one day he went to Kittisaro and said, you know what, I'm just not comfortable with you being sick. And I've realized that now. And I give you permission to be sick, if that's what you need to be. And so that was his experience with that. Finding the core emotion was that he was just unhappy at having this monk always be sick. Yeah. Go ahead.
Yeah, I can give an example of my own experience. My first marriage was really a terrible marriage, but I kept trying to make it work, kept trying to keep it going, until one day I realized that it was because I was afraid I didn't deserve a good marriage. And that's why I was staying in a bad marriage
Okay. I see people stay in bad marriages for a long time. Sometimes I wonder, were they afraid of being alone? Were they afraid of loneliness? You know, you do have to make life choices too, though, right? So, yeah. This is one of those convergences of psychological theory and Buddhism, which many people like to split. I guess Buddhists like to be, you know, psychology is just for, you know, we're about the highest, the psychology is about the lowest people. But there are a lot of convergences between psychology and Dharma. So,
question. I like this storytelling and everything. It's kind of entertaining. But why are so many things hidden in stories rather than being explained as they are? Also, you know, I think Buddhism has a lot of symbolism. Isn't that distracting? Isn't that exactly the opposite of what it should be? So why not saying things as they are rather than hiding them in forms and in stories and so on?
so stories are designed to make powerful symbols that enter into your consciousness and move you, that you can call on without having to work it out, without having to think it out. And so all cultures around the world have stored wisdom in stories. It's ubiquitous to human beings. The Buddha constantly did this too, but he would always explain the story. He'd always say what each different thing in the story meant. So many examples. He had the story of 6 robbers who were coming to rob a village, and in that village there are empty pots, and a person looks around and sees all these empty pots, and then hears there are 6 robbers coming, and then he would explain the empty pots are your senses, and when you examine them you find that they're not quite what you thought they were. The 6 robbers are 6 sense desires that are coming to get you. So he would always explain every element within the story, which I appreciate. But a story will move you in ways that a logical treatise wouldn't. I think of Christianity and just the symbols in there of Christ suffering for humanity. It's a really powerful symbol that can move you. Or his forgiveness. That's an example of which you can follow without having to work out what's forgiveness and how do I do it. You have that example, that story example. It will move you and motivate you. And I think part of the problem of today's society is we don't have a good mythology. We don't have good stories that we can adhere to. Joseph Campbell talked a lot about this. I have one example. I'm not sure if I should tell you, but there was a guy in the south of Hue Hin, and he was cheating on his wife, and she cut off his penis and fed it to ducks. Ducks not so auspicious in this story. And then he'd ordained as a monk because, you know, what else can you do? But the thing that struck me with this story was, this true story, was that he wouldn't press any charges against his wife. And he said, well, I was cheating on her, and she's a good mother, and I wanted to look after the kids. So he refused to press charges to her. And that's having a story or a mythology that's bigger than yourself. It's not you just working it out and figuring out for you. It's have this story of karma in this case. Like, well, you know, I had bad karma, she has her karma and stuff, which has really, like, impressed me about that story, because that wouldn't happen in America. So having a mythology, having those stories around that you can hold with you are just so powerful as motivating symbols, especially in times when you really need it. The symbol of the second arrow, when I'm pulling my feet along there, and I'm like, yeah, I'm stabbing myself with the second arrow. It's a nice, clear, simple story. It's like, shake it off. Yeah. So we do have written treatises too, but then you come into Kant and all the philosophers and Schopenhauer and people. I mean, they wrote interesting texts and things, but you'd be hard pushed to be really moved by it. Or when you need it, do you have access to those particular stories? Yeah. Sorry?
I'm trying to go to the belly in the past few days, as I left my partner, and I realized shortly after that it was probably, I had my reason, but I also, it was probably a little bit impulsive. And the first days has been quite difficult to accept my decision and all the concept. I was completely entangled. And I tried to smoke some marijuana to not think about it, to not enter the belly. And I realized that I wanted to do it again. And I guess it was when I understood there was just a way to cover the pain.
Yeah, avoidance.
Yeah. And so I'm not saying that I'm super happy now, but slowly understanding that there are infinite possibilities.
You slowly lose your fear of the feeling, and then that's what resolution is. Then you can remember the story and not get caught up and entangled in it. But sometimes you're just entangled, and it's going to take time. This time last year, they refused my visa because of the TM30 business, and I couldn't get the right documents, and it's just the panic here, because I've been in Thailand 30 years, like, oh Christ, where do I go now? Like, I'm going to have to, you need visas to go anywhere now, and then you can't just go to Singapore like I used to or something. And I was just in a panic. And you just have to feel it. It's not going to go away. Eventually I got the visa, but sometimes you just have to accept that feeling's going to be there and be willing to feel it. Okay, we can call it, we can end there. Next week, I'm here next week. Topic is karma, the sliders, the quality sliders. Okay.
Okay, well, thank you very much. As I said earlier this evening, it's not a sure thing, so we thought the evening was without Phra Pandit, we still get Phra Pandit. And next week, indeed, he'll be back again. Today it was about dragons and ducks and all kinds of other little animals. Next week it will be about chameleons. So we're in Pandit's zoo these weeks. And well, we have been cleaning up the room, we can do it again. This time I'm going to ask or suggest that you use the donation boxes, because we actually got to talk and we used the room. So thank you all very much. Once again, apologies for the confusion at the beginning, and hopefully we will find upon the next week in excellent health so that we can give that speech again. Okay, thank you all very much, and see you next week.
Okay. Yeah,
like? I don't know.
I know the theory. The reason I don't think that theory is true is because, one, we have no real record of people ever having found these
Well, there were
bones.
so many dinosaurs around. They would have done something.
We don't have any records of people finding these bones.
Right,
If we did, there would just be one or two bones and not so much in a thing. A better theory in that thing would be whales. When whales come up and, on the shore and die,
Yeah.
they would leave a dragon-like backbone,
Oh, yeah.
which would be a better theory. But then why are they fiery? Why do they have a pearl in their mouth?